Welcome back to The Look and Sound of Leadership, an ongoing series of executive coaching tips designed to help you be perceived in the workplace the way you want to be perceived. I'm Tom Henschel, your executive coach, and today we're talking about networking conversations, part 2. Pavni had plans for her future. In a year or so, she wanted to leave her leadership role in a global corporation to become a chief officer at a mid-sized company. She worried that a major roadblock would be her distaste for networking. We spent an entire coaching conversation exploring her thinking about networking. Explaining her distaste for it, she said, "It's obvious I'm only talking to them because I want something from them, but we're both pretending that's not what's happening. Ugh, it makes me want to take a shower." I agreed that putting a target on someone and taking a shot at them never feels good. I proposed the purpose of networking wasn't to get something from someone else, but rather to get to know someone else. The goal was a relationship, not a checkbox. She considered that and then said, "Okay, suppose I'm having a networking conversation, and like you said, I'm getting to know someone. I don't want to put a target on them, but I want them to hear what I'm looking for. I mean, that's why I'm networking in the first place. What would that sound like?" "Can I ask you to answer first?" I asked. "Well, maybe I'm not understanding," she said, "but when I think about networking, I tell myself, before you go in the ring, you better have your elevator speech ready, and to me that's what a networking conversation sounds like. It's a pitch." I said, "Listen, don't get me wrong, Pavni. I love elevator speeches. I think we should all have them ready to go, crisp and simple. But I don't think they're right for every occasion, and most of the time I'd say no. If you're getting to know someone, an elevator pitch may not be your best friend." "But then what's the alternative?" she asked. I smiled at her and asked, "Can you picture a Napoleon pastry?" "No," she said. "What's that?" "Oh, God, I love Napoleons. They're tall. They're made up of layer after layer of paper-thin phyllo dough. About a third of the way up, there's a layer of custard. Then there's more layers of phyllo. Then another layer of custard. Then more phyllo. And on top is this hard sugar glaze. They are ridiculously yummy." That is how I picture a networking conversation. It's a back and forth of thin little layers. One person, then the other, back and forth, building up the layers. No elevator speeches, just an exchange. She asked, "What if my elevator pitch was a layer of custard?" I laughed. "That could work." She said, "But don't hog the ball, right?" "Right," I agreed. "No monologuing." I held up a finger and shrugged and said, "Look, sometimes you'll be catching up and one or the other of you is going to tell a story, and that person's going to talk for a while. Fine, but what you said, don't hog the ball. It's a conversation, not a monologue." She said, "Your point's a good one. Remember I told you I got cornered a couple of times at a conference? If any one of them had been able to have a conversation with me, I would have felt differently about them." "Why couldn't they, do you think?" I asked. "Because they each had all this stuff they wanted to tell me, and they just threw it up all over me. It was like they knew they didn't have much time with me, so they jammed in as much as they could." I smiled at her. "Pavni, do you have fans?" She was matter of fact. "People know who I am, and they want to talk to me, and I never mind that. I'll make time for them, but not like that." So there was a power differential involved, I observed. "Well, they were more junior than I am, if that's what you mean, yes." I asked, "Will that happen when you're networking, that there'll be a power differential only the other way around?" "You mean me talking to someone above me?" she asked. "I hope so. I imagine calling some board chairs and people who were up the chain for me. Yeah, there'll be a power differential sometimes." I asked, "Can you imagine using the Napoleon method with those folks?" The question sparked her. "Whoa. If I did, that would change everything." "How so?" I asked. "I'd been picturing myself going in with a pitch, thinking I only have this little window with this person. Be prepared. Don't waste their time." "Like those people at the conference were to you," I said. "But that's it, isn't it?" she said. "When I go in loaded with my pitch, it makes me the junior party. But if I show up to build a relationship, then we can just talk." She thought a minute, then said, I'm thinking about the people I have important relationships with. They're the people that I imagine sitting around my kitchen table with me. Everyone else is just business. Don't waste my time, and I won't waste yours. Chop, chop. But if I'm going to build networks the way you describe them, that's going to have to change, isn't it? In what way? I asked. Well, I'm going to have to expand who I imagine sitting at my table. Say more, I said. She said, with the people at my table, the people I care about already, I can do that Napoleon thing back and forth all day. It's a pleasure. But now if I imagine like having our CEO at the table, that feels different to me. Because of him or you, I asked. No, me. That's what I'm saying. I treat senior people with respect, which has a bit of chop chop to it. I said, I wonder if it's an American thing. What do you mean? She said. Well, this whole Napoleon idea is about taking turns, talking, listening, back and forth. It's very informal, very egalitarian. It might not be a good fit for you. You mean because I'm Indian? She asked. I shrugged. Maybe it would feel misaligned for you. I don't know. But that's why I think I like it, she said. It's going to stretch me. I have a very strict little girl inside of me who is always pushing me forward. She's the one that doesn't want to waste anyone's time and doesn't want anyone wasting hers. If I force myself to do this Napoleon thing, that strict little girl's going to have to take a back seat. And who would show up instead? I asked. Well, I don't know. A peer, I guess. Do you know the saying, dress for the job you want, not the one you have? Sure, I said. Well, that could be what happens here, except it would be about showing up. I would show up like their peer, like the job I want. Let them get a test drive of me, see what they think. Show up like I belong there. I said, act like a peer, get treated like a peer? What do you think? Does that work? She asked. Well, if you mean, does it help build a relationship? It sounds like it could. She said, so let's suppose I'm doing the whole Napoleon thing. I could turn my elevator pitch into a sentence, right? I'd say, I'm looking to be a chief officer in a mid-sized company. I lay down that layer, and then what? I just stop talking? I laughed. Does that sound ridiculous? No, it sounds like a missed opportunity. Missed how? I asked. Because that one sentence doesn't tell the half of it, she said. Right. I get it. But can I show you a different choice? I asked. What do you mean? I said, well, let's imagine the back and forth for a second, right? So suppose whoever you're talking with asks, where do you want to be in 3 years? So that's the first layer of dough, right? From her to you. And now it's your turn. You add a layer saying, I'm looking to be chief officer at a mid-sized company. And you stop talking. Now it's her turn to add her layer. And this is the part I love. You have no idea what her layer is going to be. Maybe she'll ask you about your current role. Maybe she'll say she knows the perfect person to connect you with. Maybe she'll tell you, my Uncle Bob did the same thing back in the 1990s. You have no idea what's going to interest her. But if you let her drive the conversation to what's important to her, she's way more likely to get invested and put energy into it. Pavni said, and she wouldn't if I'm pitching at her. I said, I think people get invested when they have their own ideas. And if you keep talking, their ideas might not come to them. Imagining networking as a conversation between peers changed Pavni's thinking. What surprised her was that she found herself talking with her direct reports in a more peer-to-peer manner too. Relationships began to deepen for her, and that, she found, allowed her to show up with the look and sound of leadership. In this part of the show, I want to focus on what I think good networking sounds like. So this podcast is called The Look and Sound of Leadership, right? Well, this part of the episode is the sound of networking. I've got 3 ideas, 3 ways to make your networking sound great. And then I've got some resources and a story. Okay, here goes. 3 ways for your networking to sound great. The first way, assume equality. Right? This ties into what Pavni was talking about showing up like she belongs. But I understand why it's so hard to assume equality when you're networking. In part 1 of Networking Conversations, which was last month's episode, I proposed people automatically devote 5% of their work week to networking. Well, I don't think many people do that. I think most people say, oh my God, I've got to get networking only when they need something. For most people, networking comes with a scarcity mindset. Unlike, all those 5%ers, the only reason we're networking at all is because we're one down. We feel like a supplicant, and supplication has caution and fear in it. Those are sounds that do not instill confidence in other people. I'm suggesting the first way for your networking to sound great is assume equality. So how can you do that? The short answer, know your value. So maybe you're a subject matter expert like Pavni. Maybe you have a track record of accomplishments. Maybe you're a fantastic team player. Maybe you're just willing to show up and do whatever's going to be helpful. Your job before you begin networking, find your value so you can assume equality. By the way, there's an episode from a long time back called Assume Equality. It's good. The assume equality concept has helped me for many, many years. There's a link in the show note. Assume Equality. Check it out. So all of that is the first way you want your networking conversations to sound. Sound like an equal, know your value, bring abundance, assume equality. The second way a networking conversation can sound great, sound curious. Be curious about what interests them. And yes, you might be talking about yourself, but you don't know what interests them about you. Sounding curious means leaving space for the other person, no monologuing. It is the whole idea behind the Napoleon pastry metaphor. So what would curiosity really, really sound like? A great tool for allowing the other person to be curious is sorting and labeling. I have not mentioned the sorting and labeling tool in a while. If you don't know sorting and labeling, it is the single fastest way to sound executive. It is not a hard tool to learn. If you want to learn it, there's an episode in the library explaining it. It's called Sorting and Labeling. There's a PDF in the Essential Tools bin to support you. It's called Sorting and Labeling. The links are in the show notes. Check them out. Even if you're not networking, learn sorting and labeling. It is the look and sound of leadership. But for our purposes, in this episode, sorting and labeling is going to allow your networking to sound curious. How so? I want to do a demo for you so you can hear what it really sounds like. I'm going to quote a conversation that happens to me frequently. Suppose I'm somewhere, there's chat going on, perfect place to network, I don't know who I'm going to meet, I'm ready for anything, and someone says to me, "What do you do?" That's the first layer of the Napoleon, right? Okay, here's how I respond. I'm an executive coach. And I stop talking. 4 words. That's my label. That's my thin little layer of phyllo. Now it's her turn. I am curious. What is she going to want to know? And maybe she's not even interested. Maybe she doesn't want to know anything and she changes the subject. That's okay. It's better than me blabbing at her. For the sake of this demo, however, let us suppose that she is curious about who I serve. And so she asks, who are your typical clients? And that's her layer of phyllo. And I sort and label, and I say, well, typically I coach in Fortune 500 companies with vice presidents and above. And I stop talking. And then she adds her layer. She asks, what do you coach on? And I sort and label, saying, usually I coach on 3 things: executive presence, rising women, and disruptive executives. And I stop talking. And then she adds her 4th layer. She says, disruptive executives like change agents? And I say, no. Disruptive executives like too valuable to fire, but too disruptive to keep. Okay, let's stop there. So first, that is a real exchange that has happened to me more than once. And I think it's a win. In the space of a minute, she asked me 4 questions about my work. And in each instance, I didn't know why she was asking. So I just answered her question and I threw the ball back to her. Now, to do it, I had to be prepared. I had to have my labels ready. My readiness keeps me from expounding or explaining or monologuing. My readiness allowed her to be curious. And let me just really quickly do the flip side. Here's what curiosity does not sound like. This just happened to me recently. I was on a Zoom. I'm having a networking conversation with a guy. He used to be an executive. He's about 18 months into his coaching. I ask him, hey, what do you coach on? And he says 2 things. And I think, Great. Sorting and labeling. And then he talked for 6 minutes about his two things. I was watching the clock. A 6-minute monologue. That is the opposite of curiosity. It was not how great networking sounds. Here's my analogy for this. When I ask him, what do you coach on? It's like I'm extending a little teacup, hoping he'll fill it up. But instead, he whips out this fire hose and he slams open the valves and he blasts me. So this is the second way for your networking to sound great. Be curious. Be crisp, sort and label, stop talking sooner. If you want some help on this, there's an episode called Be Concise. Link is in the show notes. Okay, here's the third idea about how to make your networking sound great. Be appropriate. Years and years ago, a friend of mine reached out to me. She told me about this woman who had just moved to Southern California. She had been coaching in Mexico City. My friend asked, would I meet with her? And, I believe in networking, so I said, of course. I meet this woman for breakfast. She spends the first 30 minutes or so talking all about herself. Definitely monologuing. But okay, whatever. And then she asks if she can work for my company. And I remember being a little stunned. She and I had no relationship yet. I did not know this woman at all. And I thought, what would make her think that I would put her in front of my clients when I don't know her? It was completely inappropriate. Another friend of mine used to say that bad networking sounds like this. Can we get a cup of coffee? And then in the next breath, can we get married? That was that woman at breakfast, right? She was leaping from coffee to marriage without building any relationship at all. For you, being appropriate means tailoring your ask to the situation. What's appropriate for you to ask of this person at this time in your relationship? Be appropriate. So the 3 ways for your networking to sound great. Assume equality, right? Know your value. Be curious. Use the Napoleon method, sort and label, be short and crisp. And be appropriate. Build a relationship. I also said I had some resources for you and a story. I will share both of those right after this month's gratitude. My gratitude this month starts with Scott Ritzheimer. Scott hosts a podcast called Secrets of the High Demand Coach. Scott had me on as a guest, and we had a conversation that was really fun and very fast-paced. One thing that Scott was curious about was what leadership sounds like. And that just felt like a theme with what we're talking about here today. The model that I shared with Scott on that show is one that I've never shared before. I thought it was a great conversation. The link is in the show notes. Scott, thanks. For the first time in many years, there were no new reviews this month, so I don't have specific listeners to shout out to, but I continue to be so grateful for how engaged all of you are. You reach out to me with stories about your workplaces. Thank you for those. You reach out to me asking for PDFs and support materials. I'm always glad to be in touch. And you reach out to me to talk about coaching. Most of you are not Fortune 500 vice presidents and above. Even so, I have a program designed specifically for the listening community. It's world-class coaching at an affordable price. I'm grateful to all of you who take me up on this. It has been a joy. Thank you. And please don't hold back on the reviews. They really do help. Keep them coming. Thanks. Another way of expressing my gratitude, I want to share 4 resources with you to help you develop your networking skills. So here are the 4 resources. First, there is a comprehensive report on how to leverage the most recent algorithm on LinkedIn. It's an amazing piece of research put together by Richard Vanderblom. If you want to increase your effectiveness on LinkedIn, check it out. The link is in the show notes. Number 2 and 3, 2 episodes that I did with Dave Stachowiak on the Coaching for Leaders podcast. One episode is a conversation about networking, and one is about elevator speeches. They both will deepen your thinking and add to your toolkit. And both are just really nice, lovely, comfortable conversations with Dave, so it's a pleasure to listen to. The links are in the show notes. And then finally, a PDF from us about networking. I know many of you already have downloaded this. It's called 10 Rules of Networking. It's in the Essential Tools bin on the Essential Communications website. You can download it for free. Please help yourself. It's just one more way to help you get better at networking. It so happens that all 4 of the resources that I just mentioned were in our monthly email. I don't usually mention the tools and the resources that are in those emails on the show, but you're, of course, welcome to have them. If you want to get the email, go to the Essential Communications website and let me know you'd like to sign up, or use the link in the show notes. I will be grateful to add you to the list. That is this month's gratitude and resources, so thank you. I want to close the episode with a story about an executive who went through a transformation in her thinking about networking. Now, I want to preface the story by reiterating a major concept in these 2 networking episodes. The purpose of networking is to build relationship. It's not a quid pro quo. It's not I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Networking is about building relationships, and building relationships takes time. Okay, here's the story. This story is about a woman named Caroline. When I met Caroline, she was leading a very large team, and the feedback from most of them was that they admired her, but they were also scared to death of her. They found her demanding and unforgiving. Her peers reported that she was really smart, but curt and uncollaborative. The senior leaders thought she was great, but they worried that she was going to need to soften her sharp edges, or she was never going to become the leader they wanted her to be. As you can imagine, in our coaching, building relationships was an early topic of conversation, and Caroline was blunt with me. Without any hesitation, she said, I don't have time for relationships. And I really understood. She was already working impossible hours. She was developing her team. There was a backlog of work, and she had 2 small kids at home. I really did understand. And I also believed that her relentless focus on delivering results at the expense of healthy relationships could possibly derail her. Over time, Carolyn really took the feedback to heart, and she made many changes in her life, and one change, just as one example, is seen on her calendar. Nowadays, Caroline has 2 or 3 or 4 lunches scheduled every week. And sometimes it's with a senior leader, sometimes she's lunching with a peer, sometimes it's with a junior person who she's mentoring. And these aren't 45 little quickie lunches in the cafeteria. These are 90-minute lunches out of the building 2 or 3 times a week. Caroline is modeling the idea that networking is an automatic 5% of your job every week. I am impressed when I think about how huge a shift that is from someone who used to say, I don't have time for relationships. What's interesting, listening to Caroline now, she says her life is so much richer. And I am thrilled for her. If you want to keep developing your networking skills, I hope you'll look in the show notes at all these resources that I've mentioned. You can also look back in our podcast library. It goes all the way back to 2008. This episode is tagged in 3 categories: for women, relationship building, and social skills. If these networking ideas are feeling sticky, here are 5 very different episodes that you might listen to: acting on the corporate stage, becoming expert, branding yourself, the executive imposter, and pursuing a promotion 2020. And 2 more episodes: assume equality and be concise. Okay, that's it for me. Until next time, I'm Tom Henschel. Thanks so much for listening.